Welcome back to a new week, which means a new furniture project. The last few weeks I've focused on some construction and custom building, but this week I'm going to get back to refinishing a vintage dresser. I saw this dresser listed on Facebook Marketplace and it was really difficult to see the condition from the initial posting. I knew it was painted, I knew it was vintage, I just didn't know the condition, if it was name brand, the materials that were used, anything like that. Whenever I'm picking up a painted piece, it's a little bit of a gamble. I don't know what's going to be under this paint. I don't know the condition of it, if it's going to be salvageable, if it's even going to be worth trying to salvage, or if it's something that is better off just being painted. When I got there and picked it up, I did notice that it did not have a maker's mark anywhere. And the materials that it's constructed with, I can tell they're not terrible, they're just not the most high end. I'm almost positive that these drawer pulls, these center details, are actually a plastic material. They just feel that way just from feeling them. Even though they've been painted, I can kind of tell. And the paint that was used, I'm thinking was probably like a chalk paint or a mineral paint. It has that chalky finish where if you touch it, it kind of leaves a little bit of a mark behind, and it's just failing in some areas. You can see there's a lot of texture under that paint, and they also just painted over some areas that really needed to be repaired. That always makes my task a little bit more difficult, but it also makes for a great transformation. I think the game plan for this piece is to start stripping it back, sanding it back, getting all this paint off, and then assessing what I have left to work with. I would like to leave this wood grain, but judging off some of the damage that I know is there, I don't know if that'll be achievable. We'll have to see. This piece will be as much of a mystery to me as it is to you. So follow along and let's see how I can transform this piece this week. This is a perfect example of a dresser where the drawers are a little bit tricky. They definitely have spots that they're supposed to go, and I had to really mess around with it to get them in the correct locations. Because of this, I really want to make sure that I'm labeling these in the orientation that they seem to fit the easiest in. I'm still going to have to mess around with some of the plastic glides that are on the sides. They've just broken and come loose over the years, as well as some of the actual plastic tracks that ride on these wooden drawer slides. But before I do any of that, I do want to go ahead and label each drawer to make it easier in the future. So this is the first drawer on the left side. So I'm going to say L1. I'm going to try to remove one of these handhold details for a number of reasons. One of them, it's going to be really difficult to strip and try to sand and remove all the paint from all of these crevices. And then secondly, I want to confirm that this is indeed a plastic. I'm like 95% sure, but I can tell that it's just held on by some pin nails through the inside of the drawer box. So I think if I can get a scraper under the edge, yeah, I'll be able to pry it up with very minimal damage. And if they are plastic, I think I'm just going to remove them and fill the holes and do something different. Yeah, you can see completely just a molded plastic, which would be fine. I mean, it was the original design of this piece, but it's not going to stain the same as wood is going to. And this has a wood veneer over the front, so if I go to stain it, you can't stain plastic. I would have to either paint it or I don't really know. I don't know. You can see it's kind of a beige color under there. I just don't think it would mesh very well. With those trim pieces pried off, I now am going to take my chemical stripper and start stripping all the paint away. If this really truly is like a chalk or a mineral paint, paint stripper works great on that style of paint, so it should come off pretty easy. That paint stripper worked pretty well on those drawer fronts, so I'm going to finish up that step with some afterwash and a fine grit steel wool. You can really see it took off even most of the original stain and finish on these drawer fronts. There's just some original stubborn areas that are still clinging on. That steel wool will really gently buff out whatever's left behind, and a nice clean paper towel will wipe up the rest of the residue. One of the design plans I was sure about was removing this old base and actually chopping the body of this dresser down a little bit. This is just a piece of particle board with some veneer over the top, and there's quite a bit of damage on that veneer. It was just held on with a couple of screws and some glue and wooden blocks. Once I removed those screws, I was able to hammer it out pretty easily. You can see right here, this edge, there was some water damage on the side of this particle board with veneer over the top. Once there's some moisture damage, especially with particle board, it can get a little bit difficult to patch and repair. So in this instance, my best bet is to actually just chop it down so that it's a little bit shorter and build a new set of legs, a whole new base that is solid wood and will be better at supporting the weight of this dresser, as well as protecting it in the future from dings, scrapes, just general use from having it in your home. I marked a straight line where I wanted to cut, and I grabbed my skill saw and I'm just cutting a straight line down both sides of the body of the dresser, making sure that they are equal so that I don't have one side of the dresser that's going to be longer than the other side. The front trim board is actually a solid wood, as well as the back trim board. So there's plenty of material with good structural integrity to attach my base onto. I wanted to chop down and shorten this dresser body before I got to stripping it. It's just a little bit less material to have to remove, even though it's just a couple inches on the three sides of this piece. So back with the chemicals, back with the scraping. This paint did come off pretty easily, and I figured that it would. They obviously used some kind of primer, I'm assuming, underneath. That's what this whiter paint is. And it did cling behind a little bit more stubbornly than the actual black paint itself. So I am going to go in with a second round of stripper just on the top where it really adhered the best. This will also help to remove any of that old finish as well. It was at this point that I had a sneaking suspicion that some of this white primer was going to be a little bit of an issue with some of the deeper wood grain. I could see that it did settle into some of that grain and knew that I would have to address this later on after I got all of this chemical stripper off. Even though I did use several rounds of chemical stripper plus that afterwash, it never removes 100% of the residual stains, finishes, just the products. So I always plan on having to do a light sanding after that stripping process is complete and the wood is all dried back out. Here I'm just using a 120 grit sandpaper and I'm gently going over all of the areas of wood grain. Now this is a veneer, so I am going a little bit carefully on the edges. Luckily, all of the drawer boxes do have a solid wood core in the center. It's really just the side panels and the top of this dresser that have that compressed material as the core component. But all in all, the wood grain that they did use was really pretty as a veneer over the drawer fronts and the tops and sides of this piece. Not to mention the solid wood components making up the frame of the dresser itself. Now there was quite a bit of that black overspray on the drawer boxes, so I did want to clean them up as best as I could. When it comes to sanding down the top, I went really carefully, really slowly, and I wanted to make sure that I gave it a very even sanding. I find that if you focus too much on one area and not another area of the top and get a little overeager and rush things, it can look a little bit patchy. So just really focus on giving everything a very even sanding, because if there's even a little bit of that old finish left behind, it could affect the way the stain takes to the raw veneer once again. There's some stubborn specks of paint that settled into some of the deeper wood grain. So I'm going to take a wire bristle brush and some acetone and just scrub those out. The detail sanding on this piece did take me quite a while. With it flipped on its back and on either one of its sides, it did make things a little bit easier so that I wasn't fighting gravity quite so badly, but I had to take my time and go slowly. My detail sander helped me get into all of the corners and nooks and crevices. I did not focus the chemical stripper too heavily on the trim along the front because I did know that it was solid wood and therefore could handle a pretty aggressive sanding. I really just wanted to focus that chemical stripper mostly on the areas with the veneer, like the top, the sides, the drawer fronts, whereas my more abrasive sandpaper could really get through the paint along those drawer trim areas. And because this paint is black, it's pretty easy to see, so it's not difficult to see any areas that I might have missed. There's a few sizable gouges in the edge of this veneer on the side. I'm going to go ahead and take a stainable filler and fill all of those areas. This might take several coats of filler, so I will apply this, let it dry, sand it back, and if it has sunken in, I will go ahead and apply some more. A trick that you can use when sanding down a top between the different grits of sandpaper, draw a fine pencil mark along the surface of wherever you're looking to sand. And as long as you've sanded through all the pencil marks, you know you've relatively covered everything evenly and applied enough pressure as long as you're able to remove those marks. Before I put my sanders away, I do want to cut all the pieces that will make up the legs and base for this dresser. I measured how long I want the entire base to be and subtracted 3 inches from that because each one of my legs is 1.5 inches wide. I doubled that up for the front and back of the base and cut 2 side pieces as well. The next step is to cut all 4 legs. I did opt for 6-inch legs in this situation. I find that 6 inches is a pretty well balanced leg height in relation to the width of my board that I'm using to build the base. I'm holding this together with pocket holes, so I want to drill 2 pocket holes on either end of all 4 boards, as well as several pocket holes along the long lines of the boards. This will allow me to attach these boards to the body of the dresser itself. This way, if anyone ever wants to remove these legs or base in the future, all they would simply have to do is unscrew it from the body of the piece itself, and you could remove it, restain it, or just completely create a new base altogether years down the road. With all those holes drilled in, it's time to smooth sand everything. Using a foam abrasive on my detail sander, I'm going to sand everything down with a 220 grit sandpaper, removing any rough edges, splintery bits, and just prepping these boards so that they will take the stain evenly. It's so much easier to sand these components before they're all screwed together. I also find it easiest to stain them before they're all put together, especially if I'm using a water-based stain. It's just easier to apply the stain to all pieces, all edges, and be able to wipe each individual piece back independent of each other instead of having to try to stain an entire side or section at a time and risk that stain drying too early and getting some streaky or hazy features. The stain color that I did opt to go with for the legs, the base, as well as the body of the dresser is this water-based stain. It's a special walnut color, so it is more of a medium-toned brown stain. It's not too dark, not too light. One of the strange quirks that I do find with these bear stains is they will go on a much different color than how they look when they dry. They definitely do cool out, and the color does lighten a little bit as they dry. The top coat does bring a little bit of that luster, a little bit of that warmth back, but if you do end up using a stain like this, just know it might not be its true color while that stain and wood is still wet. At this point, I'm attaching all the legs together, all the different components, using those pocket holes and set of wood screws. I'm using a spacer board between the longer horizontal pieces of the leg base and the actual legs themselves. This will create a little bit of dimension and cause that base to sit in by about 1/8 of an inch from the actual outside edge of the leg itself. Because these are so long, I'm having to construct the rest of it on the floor. Again, using those spacer blocks to make sure all of my spacing is even. And with it all put together, I can now clamp it onto the actual bottom of the dresser itself. These clamps really help to hold it in place so that I have an equal distance inset from the body of the dresser. I like to have a little bit of an inset just because, again, it just looks visually interesting to me. Hammering home some nylon foot pegs, and the base is done and ready to be sealed. I can flip it upright and work on actually staining the body of the dresser and the drawers themselves. When I'm staining large areas like this with a water-based stain, I'm applying plenty of product. You definitely do not want to go too light-handed when it comes to applying water-based stain. I'm still going to be wiping it back just like I do with any other oil-based stain. However, if you don't put enough product on there, it runs the risk of drying too quickly on you, and that's when you get those streaks and hazy areas that just don't look great. For this same reason, I like to wipe in long, even strokes going in the same direction as the wood grain and to take things in sections. You can see I split this top into 2 different sections before wiping back, and as long as I'm very careful to wipe where those 2 sections interact with each other, there is no issue doing it this way. It's time to top coat and seal everything, seal in all of that stain. I'm going to use my typical water-based polyurethane in a satin sheen. I like to run this through my sprayer, and once that first coat is dry, I will do a very, very light sanding just to make sure everything's nice and smooth, and spray on at least 3 generous coats of this product. Between the first and subsequent coats of top coat is when I like to do my color correcting. I have paints that are specifically for this purpose. They come in a bunch of different, very common wood colors, and I will just very lightly brush them on all the little areas that I might have filled, might have had some veneer damage, especially those little tiny pinholes where I removed that original trim detail on the drawer faces. Once I'm happy with the color and the way that it's looking, I will go ahead and seal up that paint using my top coat, just like I have with all the rest of the dresser. The inside of this dresser is really dusty and dirty. I already vacuumed it out, but it could use a good cleaning. I'm also going to take some wax and condition all of these wooden drawer glides. They just help things slide so much easier, and it will also protect them so that they'll last as long as possible. I also know there's a few missing plastic drawer glides on the side. I am going to fit the drawers in and see which ones need to be replaced, which ones need more material added to, just to make sure everything slides as smoothly as possible. It's hard to show in the video, but this front trim veneer just on the front edge of the dresser is really having a lot of glue failure and bubbling. This can sometimes happen, especially when using water-based products. It's just one of the risks you run. There are 2 options when it comes to repairing bubbling veneer like this. The first one would be to try to make a really minor little cut in the veneer, just enough to be able to stick a glue nozzle in and glue it back down, or just remove the failing veneer and basically replace it. This one is bubbling in quite a few places, and I know that it's really, really thin as is. So I think the best option for me is actually to remove it and replace it. What I'm gonna do is I will take a 80 grit sandpaper and I'm gonna grind away and remove as much of that veneer as possible, clean up the surface, and then apply some iron-on edge banding on the side, cut away all the excess of that, restain it, and reseal it. There are a number of these plastic track glides that are broken or just missing in general, so I am going to replace them. They're pretty common size, so it's not too difficult to find replacement parts when needed. I picked the pattern of drawer liner that I wanted to use, measured all the drawer boxes, and cut 9 equal squares to size. Whenever I'm installing drawer liner, I like to make it a little bit bigger than the actual drawer box itself. That way I have some overage. Everything gets a good cleaning. Make sure everything is dust free so that when I do stick that liner down, it doesn't stick to any little dust particles and it adheres properly. I find it easiest to work from the front of the drawer and get that front edge lined up nice and straight and then work my way back. A gentle scraper is always so helpful. If it's too sharp, it might rip holes in the edges of the drawer liner. With a sharp utility blade, I'm going to cut away the excess and get the drawer boxes ready to have the new handles installed. These particular handles were a little bit larger than what I typically get. I usually grab 5-inch hole diameters. This time I went for 7.5 because I wanted something a little bit more dramatic since I did remove such a key focal part of this dresser. I got my spacing all lined up using my cabinet hole jig. And I'm just doing little pilot holes in the beginning, and I will go back in and drill completely through that material with the guide not in place so that I have better visibility. And with these nice new long handles installed, this piece is finally done, finally wrapped up, and ready for its new home. Before we take a look to see what it looks like now, let's remind ourselves of what we started with. This was a very, very dirty, dingy, and well-used, we'll say, piece of furniture. I had no idea what was hiding under this paint. All I could hope for was a beautiful wood grain, something that was in good enough condition to salvage and bring a little bit of life back to it. It's a very sturdy, incredibly heavy piece of furniture and has a lot of storage opportunities with those 9 large drawers. The drawers were rubbing, the paint was failing, it just needed a complete refresh. And That's exactly what it got. This piece is so unbelievably stunning. I had no idea what was going to be under that paint, and I love the line details on these drawer faces. They're subtle yet impactful. I think that they add a nice design element with everything flowing in one direction. The top of this piece was really beautiful. It had some natural qualities in that wood veneer that was so pretty. A fun pop of pattern, a fun pop of color hidden inside those drawers always makes for a nice surprise, in my opinion. I really loved working on this piece. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching.